My name is Jenny, and I am 29 years old. My boyfriend, Mike, is 31. We have been together for 13 years now, with our anniversary falling right after Christmas on December 27th. Honestly, though, I am not sure we are going to make it through this holiday season. It has been a long road. So much has happened over these years. Let me tell you our story. I grew up in a middle-class family with my mom, dad, and brother. From the outside, it might have looked like a normal household, but my dad was tough on me. He was the kind of person who never thought anything I did was good enough. Whether it was my grades, my hobbies, or even how I spoke, it was never right in his eyes. Because of that, I have grown up with constant anxiety, low self-esteem, and a desperate need to seek approval. My mom is supportive, but she could not always shield me from the impact of my dad's harshness. Mike, on the other hand, had a very different upbringing. He was an only child raised mostly by his mom. His dad was an addict with a violent streak, so his mom worked non-stop to keep things afloat. Mike spent a lot of his childhood alone, figuring things out for himself. When he was young, his mom passed away from an illness Mike also struggles with. After she died, his life became even more chaotic. He has always had trouble opening up to people and has battled with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, drinking, and drug use. We met 13 years ago, the day after Christmas. At the time, we were both big into gaming and had started chatting through an online game. For me, it was a way to make friends without feeling judged for how I looked or acted. We hit it off immediately. From that first day, we were practically inseparable. He even came over to spend New Year's with me, and a few months later, during Easter, he told me he loved me. Those early days felt perfect. But things started to change after that first year. My anxiety worsened, and I found myself crying for no reason almost every day. My thoughts were overwhelming, and I felt trapped in my own head. At first, Mike was supportive, but over time, it wore on him. He started pulling away, and eventually, we broke up for the first time. That one was on me. I know my anxiety played a big part. Still, we talked it through and decided to give it another shot. For a while, things were good. But the hardest time for us came about 3 years ago. Mike began drinking heavily and using drugs again. He was going out all the time and even started having one-night stands. Around that time, his mom passed away, and he spiraled even further. When I found out about the cheating, I was heartbroken and ready to leave. Somehow, though, he convinced me to stay. He promised to change, and for a while, it seemed like he did. He stopped drinking and using drugs, and we worked on rebuilding what we had. Even so, the trust was broken, and I could not shake my fears. No matter how much better things seemed on the surface, I kept doubting him. I felt like he was lying or hiding something from me. We started fighting more, sometimes as often as once a week. He stopped being affectionate, stopped saying he loved me, and spent most of his time on his phone or sleeping. A few days ago, I gave in to my fears and checked his phone. I found messages with a girl from his work. He was texting her the way I wished he would text me, asking about her day, sharing funny videos, and joking around. When I confronted him, he said they were just friends and insisted he loved me. But he admitted that his feelings for me had changed, though he could not explain why. I asked if he wanted to be with her, and he got defensive. He said he loved me, but if we were not together, maybe he would pursue something with her. That stung. Then came Christmas Eve. We had plans to visit my brother's house, and it was important to leave early. But Mike volunteered to stay late at work to help out. My gut told me something was off, so I checked his phone again. Sure enough, he had stayed to keep her company. When I asked him about it, he was furious that I had looked at his phone. He said he feels like he has no big emotions anymore and is unsure of what he wants. Last night, he hugged me tightly in his sleep, but this morning, he was distant again. He says he wants to work things out, but I feel like he is not really here anymore. Am I holding on to something that is already gone? Or is there a way to fix this? I remember the first time I met Mike. It was the day after Christmas, 13 years ago. Back then, I was a shy 29-year-old trying to find my place in a world that often felt too big and unforgiving. Mike was different from anyone I had ever met. We had been chatting online for weeks, bonding over late-night gaming sessions. For someone like me, who struggled with anxiety and felt invisible most of the time, our connection felt like finding a hidden treasure. Growing up, my family had always seemed picture-perfect from the outside, a solid middle-class home with my mom, dad, and brother. But appearances can be deceiving. My dad was hard on me. Nothing I did was ever enough. Even when I excelled, it was brushed off as okay. That constant criticism shaped me into someone who doubted her worth at every turn. My mom tried to be there for me, but there was only so much she could do. Mike's world was even tougher. He had grown up mostly alone, his mom working long hours just to make ends meet. His father was a volatile presence, an addict and an alcoholic with a dangerous temper. When Mike was only a teenager, his mom passed away from a hereditary illness, leaving him to navigate life on his own. That kind of loss leaves a mark, and Mike had his fair share of struggles. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, trouble opening up, and eventually turning to drinking and drugs to cope. The day we met in person, I was nervous but excited. He had this way of making me feel safe, like I did not have to hide who I was. We spent hours talking, laughing, and getting to know each other. By New Year's Eve, he was already at my place, ringing in the new year together. A few months later, during Easter, he told me he loved me. It was the kind of whirlwind romance that felt too good to be true. But life is never just smooth sailing. As we settled into our relationship, cracks began to show. My anxiety, which had always been a background hum, grew louder. I started overthinking everything. Every word, every look, every silence. Mike, on the other hand, struggled to handle my constant need for reassurance. His natural avoidance clashed with my desperate need for connection, and before long, the fights began. Still, we always found our way back to each other. Even when things got tough, there was something about us that felt unshakable. Or so I thought. After that first year together, things started to shift in ways I had not anticipated. My anxiety, once manageable, began to take over my life. It was like a shadow that followed me everywhere, creeping into my thoughts and convincing me that something was always wrong. Mike tried to help at first. He really did. He would sit with me during my lowest moments, holding my hand and telling me everything would be okay. But even the most patient person has limits. Over time, his support turned into frustration. "You have to stop crying all the time," he said one night after I broke down over something I could not even explain. "I do not know how to help you anymore." That was our first real fight, and it felt like a crack in the foundation of everything we had built. By the second year, things came to a head. I could tell Mike was pulling away, spending more time with his friends, staying out late, and avoiding the heavy conversations we used to have. One night, I confronted him. "Do you even want to be with me anymore?" I asked, my voice trembling. He sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "I do," he said after a long pause. "But it is a lot. I feel like I cannot breathe sometimes." That was the first time we broke up. It was a mutual decision, but it felt like my heart had been ripped out of my chest. For weeks, I cried myself to sleep, replaying every moment of our relationship and wondering where I had gone wrong. Eventually, we found our way back to each other. Mike reached out, saying he wanted to give it another try. "I miss you," he admitted. "And I know we can figure this out." It felt like a lifeline, and I clung to it with everything I had. For a while, things were good again. We found a rhythm that worked, learning how to navigate our differences and communicate better. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect it. 3 years ago, everything changed. Mike's drinking, which had always been occasional, became a problem. He started going out more often, coming home late or not at all. At first, I chalked it up to stress. His job was demanding, and he was still dealing with the loss of his mom. But then I started noticing other things. The smell of alcohol on his breath, the way he avoided looking me in the eye, and the late-night texts from people I did not know. One night, he did not come home at all. When he finally walked through the door the next morning, I confronted him. "Where were you?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "Out," he said flatly, refusing to elaborate. It was not long before I learned the truth. Mike had been unfaithful. He confessed during one of our many arguments, his words slurred from too much alcohol. "It was a mistake," he said, his eyes glossy. "I do not even know why I did it." I was devastated. Every moment we had shared felt like a lie. But instead of walking away, I stayed. Maybe it was love, or maybe it was fear of starting over. Either way, I gave him another chance. He promised to change, swearing he would quit drinking and stay away from the people who had been a bad influence on him. And for a while, he did. Things started looking up. We went out more, spent quality time together, and even reignited the spark in our relationship. But deep down, I knew the trust was gone. Even though Mike seemed to be turning over a new leaf, the damage had already been done. The ghosts of his actions lingered in my mind, whispering doubts I could not silence. I tried to bury my insecurities, convincing myself that things were better. But trust is a fragile thing, and once it is broken, it is almost impossible to put back together. I started noticing small changes in Mike, things that reminded me of the worst times. He had quit drinking for a while, but now he would have a beer here or there, insisting it was just one. His phone was always close by, the screen angled away whenever I walked into the room. When I asked him about it, he would shrug it off, calling me paranoid. My anxiety, always lurking in the background, came roaring back. I could not stop the thoughts from spiraling. Was he hiding something? Was he lying to me again? The nights we spent laughing and reconnecting started to feel like a facade. One night, I could not take it anymore. While he was in the shower, I picked up his phone. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through his messages. Most of them seemed innocent, texts from coworkers, friends, and family. But then I saw her name, Sophie. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the conversation. I knew I should not invade his privacy, but the curiosity and fear was too much. I opened it. The texts were casual at first, work-related jokes and small talk. But as I scrolled further, I saw the kind of intimacy I had been craving from Mike. He was asking Sophie about her day, sending her memes and videos, and even remembering small details about her life. My chest tightened as I read his words. He had not spoken to me like that in months. When he came out of the bathroom, I confronted him. "Who is Sophie?" I asked, my voice trembling. "She is just a co-worker," he said, his tone defensive. "We talk sometimes, that is all." "Do you talk to her more than me?" I pressed, tears welling up in my eyes. He sighed, running a towel through his hair. "Jenny, I am not doing anything wrong. You are blowing this out of proportion." But I could see it in his face, something had shifted between us. When I pushed further, he admitted his feelings had changed. "I do not know what is wrong with me," he said. "I love you, but I feel stuck. Like I am just going through the motions." His words cut deep. For years, I had blamed myself for our problems. My anxiety, my overthinking, my insecurities. But now it was clear that Mike was fighting his own battles, and I was not sure if I could win against them. I tried to focus on fixing things. We planned more date nights, spent time talking about our future, and tried to rekindle what we had. But the trust issues lingered, and I could not shake the feeling that I was competing with someone I did not even know. Christmas was approaching, and I hoped the holidays might bring us closer. But instead, they revealed just how far apart we had grown. By the time Christmas Eve rolled around, the tension between Mike and me was impossible to ignore. Our 13th anniversary was just days away, but instead of feeling excited, I was consumed by dread. I wanted so badly to believe we could still fix things, that we could recapture the love we had once shared. But every glance, every conversation, felt like a reminder of how much had changed. We had plans to spend Christmas Eve at my brother's house, and I hoped the family gathering might bring some warmth back into our relationship. Mike, however, seemed distant from the start. He insisted he had to work late, volunteering to stay at the office until 4 o'clock. Something about it did not sit right with me. While he was gone, my anxiety got the better of me. I picked up his phone again, guilt gnawing at me as I unlocked it. There it was, a conversation with Sophie. The messages were not overtly romantic, but they carried a lightness and attention that I had not seen from Mike in months. "I am stuck here till 4, he had texted her. "Ugh, that sucks," she replied. "At least we are suffering together." I read on, my stomach twisting. The banter was playful, even flirtatious in a way that felt all too familiar. Mike had stayed to keep her company, and while it might have been innocent on the surface, it felt like a betrayal. When he got home, I could not hold back. "Why did you not just tell me you were staying late with Sophie?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. His expression darkened. "Are you seriously going through my phone again?" he snapped. "What is wrong with you?" "I would not have to if you were honest with me," I shot back. The argument escalated quickly, both of us saying things we did not mean. He accused me of being paranoid, of suffocating him with my insecurities. I accused him of being emotionally unfaithful, of prioritizing someone else over me. By the time we arrived at my brother's house, the holiday spirit was the last thing on my mind. Mike barely spoke to me, his focus entirely on his phone or the television. My family noticed the tension, but I plastered on a smile and pretended everything was fine. That night, as we lay in bed, Mike finally broke the silence. "I do not know what I feel anymore," he admitted. "I do not even feel like myself these days." His words were like a knife to the heart. For years, I had clung to the belief that we could overcome anything together. But now, it felt like I was holding onto a thread that was fraying more with every passing day. Still, there were moments, fleeting but powerful, that gave me hope. As we drifted off to sleep, he wrapped his arms around me, holding me tighter than he had in weeks. For a brief moment, it felt like the old Mike was still there, the one who had promised to love me no matter what. But by morning, the distance was back. He barely looked at me as he got ready for the day, his mind seemingly a million miles away. Christmas Day dawned heavy with uncertainty. The glow of the holiday lights and the sound of cheerful carols on the radio felt almost mocking. Mike and I barely spoke that morning, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on us like a storm cloud. I tried to act normal, setting the table for breakfast and unwrapping gifts, but the tension was palpable. Later in the day, while Mike was in the living room scrolling through his phone, I sat in the kitchen staring at my coffee cup. My mind was racing, replaying every argument, every moment of doubt, every sign that we were slipping further and further apart. I knew I could not go on like this, trapped in a cycle of suspicion and pain. When I finally worked up the courage to confront him, he looked up at me, his expression guarded. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady despite the lump in my throat. "About what?" he asked, though he knew exactly what was coming. "About us. About what we are doing to each other." For the first time in weeks, we sat down and talked, really talked. I told him how his emotional distance and secrecy had left me feeling invisible, how his actions with Sophie felt like a betrayal even if he insisted they were innocent. He admitted he had been pulling away, unsure of his feelings and struggling to find happiness in anything, not just our relationship. "I do not know who I am anymore," he confessed, his voice tinged with sadness. "I feel like I am just existing, and I do not know how to fix it." "Do you want to fix it with me?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. He was silent for a long time, his gaze fixed on the floor. "I do not know," he said finally. "I love you, but I feel like something is missing. I do not want to hurt you anymore, but I do not know if I can give you what you need." His words were both honest and devastating. For so long, I had been clinging to the idea that love was enough, that if we just tried hard enough, we could make it work. But now, I was faced with the possibility that sometimes love is not enough, that sometimes people grow apart despite their best intentions. We decided to take some space to figure out what we both wanted. It was not an easy decision, and it left me feeling hollow and uncertain. As he packed a bag and headed to stay with a friend for a while, I stood in the doorway, wondering if this was the end of our 13-year journey. In the days that followed, I reflected on everything we had been through, the good, the bad, and the moments that had defined us. I realized that I had spent so much time trying to fix things, trying to hold on, that I had lost sight of myself in the process. For the first time in years, I began to focus on me. I started therapy to work through my anxiety and rebuild my self-esteem. I reached out to friends I had drifted away from, finding solace in their support. And slowly, I began to see that no matter what happened with Mike, I would be okay. As for Mike, he reached out a few weeks later, saying he wanted to talk. When we met, he looked different, tired but more at peace. "I do not know where this leaves us," he said. "But I want to work on myself too. And maybe someday, we can figure this out together." It was not a perfect resolution, but it was a step. A step toward healing, toward growth, and toward finding clarity in the chaos. And as the new year began, I realized that sometimes the hardest journeys lead to the most meaningful discoveries. Not just about love, but about ourselves.